Great to be here, sir.
Please take your seats. We're joined today by the senior officer of our Army. General George has held that distinction for only about 2 weeks, and at this point in time, it involves doing 2 jobs. That he would take the time to travel across the country to be with us today says a lot about General George, and it also says a lot about what he thinks about you. And he brought a guest. Seated here in the front, his spouse, Miss Patty George. Where are you, Ms. George? Thank you for being here with us. For those of you who may not know, she is also a West Point graduate. General George and Sergeant Major Weimer, we want to welcome both of you to our conference, the National Guard Association of the United States. Sir, the podium is yours. Thank you for being here. Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. Okay, everybody hear me? All right, good morning. I felt a little bit like walking in late for church with everybody looking at you coming in here with all of that. So a real honor for me to be here. And first, Durr, thank you very much, and for you and the board for having me out. So there's nothing more important, I think, than being here this weekend. So really appreciate you having us. I also want to thank I've been out a little bit in the floor, the Nevada National Guard for putting all this together, and Andra, General Barry, thank you so much. I know from you have 10 people over to stay at your house, what a pain in the butt that can be, so I can't imagine having 2,000 guests, so really well done. I know my teammates, I got General Jensen who's here, I think Mike Lowe is out there in the audience, and General Hokanson, and it's good to see them somewhere other than the halls of the Pentagon, so good to see you guys. What I didn't, the only thing I'm a little bit frustrated about is that about 15 minutes ago, General Jensen told me, asked me if I could stick around tonight, and I said, no, my plans are already, I have to fly out of here. And he says, well, too bad. Tonight's the most fun night that we're gonna have. So I told him, I said, John, that would have been really helpful information to have maybe before tonight, or before today when we were talking about it. So I understand Guam and Puerto Rico out there. So next year, I'm staying for hospitality night. All right. So I've got 45 minutes. I just asked General Jensen, I said 2 hours. He said, no, 45 minutes. I'm gonna take probably about 22 minutes of that time and talk to you a little bit about where I think the Army's going, and then I want to take your questions. And everybody heard, I've got about 2 weeks under my belt. I will tell you that I will be straightforward with you. If I can't answer something, then I got all kinds of experts up here that can help me with all that. But I want to talk real quick. My first visit that I actually made after the change of responsibility was to Camp Grayling. And I'd heard a lot about, and I'm going to talk about that for a few minutes. I'd heard a lot about Northern Strike and people talking about it, and I'm like, hey, I got to get up there. My memory of Northern Strike, I was the lieutenant in the 101st, and I went up in July with just a poncho liner and remember freezing my ass off up there in the middle of the summer. But what I saw up there was super impressive and very refreshing. I don't know if we got experts. I had a chance to fire with the Bangarang crew, which were absolute experts, and they were just so motivated. Out of the 222nd Field Artillery Battalion. We got anybody here from Utah? All right, a couple of them over there. I got to see, there's 71 units that were up there. Got to see a lot of engaged and innovative leaders and soldiers. Couple shout outs to the 294th MCAS was up there out of Iowa, my home state. Anybody here from Iowa? All right. The 115th ESB was up there training out of Alabama. Anybody here Roll Tide or anything like that? And the 232nd CSB out of Illinois. Where's Illinois at? All right. So I was super impressed up up there, and soldiers were motivated, leaders were motivated. And I remember telling Major General Paul Rogers, who's up there, and that's the next thing, and I told him, I said, I'm really super impressed by this training event at the end of the day. I'd heard a lot about Northern Strike, and we were talking a little bit about, hey, what's the secret sauce? And I thought that, in my opinion, the secret sauce was that he built an environment where he actually let leaders plan their training, and then he did the hard job of trying to figure out how he could stitch all that together and make it better. So I know that we got anybody from Michigan out here? All right, super impressive out there for that training event, and my hat's off to General Rogers and his team. You know, I was impressed, but I wasn't surprised, and I tell a lot of people I've spent from my time when I was a lieutenant and training together back in the late 80s and early 90s, I have deployed a whole bunch, and I think every time I've deployed, I've had National Guard soldiers that are right there inside my formation. I remember being a battalion commander with the Pennsylvania National Guard up in the heart and the central part of Iraq, with the Georgia Guard. Anybody in here from Georgia? With the Georgia Guard in Afghanistan. And then again, when I deployed as a division commander, a very big part of our headquarters that went over with us, and real experts when it came to intel and cyber and all of that, with just a wealth of experience, were deployed with me. I've also had a lot of experience with and seen the power of state partnerships on Atlantic Resolve as the First Corps commander and what's going on. And I know that we're looking, and General Hokanson, the whole team, looking to expand those, but very, very powerful for our country, not just our military. So again, my experiences, I've been impressed, was impressed, but I'm not surprised by that. I could spend some time talking about the strategic environment. I think the one thing I tell everybody is that it's as complex and dangerous as I've seen it in the time that I've been in uniform, and we could have a real long discussion on that, but I don't think I need to go into any more detail. Everybody in here knows that. And one of the things that I think has changed the most is just how the character of war has changed over the last 2 years, and a lot of that, and I'll talk about it in a few minutes, with what we're seeing in Ukraine and some of the lessons learned that are coming out of that. But I also want to remind everybody, we look at this, we have a lot of discussions about what's going on with our Army and our total Army, our multi-compo Army, and people will talk about the Europe and they'll talk about the Pacific and all those threats that are out there. Is that I know our Army is a global Army. And we're going to have to be ready to go wherever we're going to go, and wherever we go, it's going to be a multi-compo solution. It's always been that way for our Army. You can look back in our history, and it will continue to be, and probably increasingly continue to be that way. In World War II, the U.S. Army had 31 divisions in the Pacific, 31 divisions, and a lot of people don't remember a lot of that. And if a lot of you out there in your units look back at your history and your heritage, you will see that a lot of your units were out there fighting in there, and I just mentioned that one specific theater. So our Army has to be ready. We will be ready. I'm confident that we'll be ready, and we're going to have to be ready as a total Army as we move forward. So we'll have 4 focus areas, and I want to talk to you about those 4 focus areas this morning. I'll list them out to start off. The first is warfighting. Focus area number 1 is warfighting. The second is deliver ready combat formations. That's the second. The third is continuous transformation. And the fourth is, and I'll say this again and several times probably, the one that underpins everything is what we can do to strengthen the profession of arms. All of us are professionals, and we need to be thinking about doing, that's what professionals do, whatever they can to continue to make their profession stronger and better. So I'll start with warfighting. And I'm going to have a lot of conversations with this, and I'm reminded when I was BCT commander, division commander, we used to have a lot of discussions about if there's something that you're doing that's not contributing to you being more lethal or more cohesive, then we got to really take a hard look at if we should be doing it. And that is a conversation that I think we have to have at Echelon. There's no big, people that say, hey, we're going to put out, are we not going to do this? Are we not going to do that? And I think that we have to do that. We have to have those discussions at every level. And they're going to be different at every level. Sometimes we're going to have to do certain missions because we know they need to be done. And for all of you, it may be at the state level or wherever it's at. We're going to have to do some of those missions. But I think we have to take a hard look at that. And that's part of what we should be doing with training management that we need to really focus on. I mean, what we want are trained, fit, disciplined, cohesive, and lethal teams. If we have that in our Army, we are here to fight. That's why we have a U.S. Army. Then we're doing the right thing. The other thing I've heard a lot of discussions about when people ask me, hey, are we brigade-centric or division-centric? I always tell everybody that the Army has to fight at Echelon. We have to, there's going to be a lot of missions out there where we're not just brigade-centric or division-centric. We're going to have to deploy capability and be able to fight at several echelons. And we are going to talk about that and train that and make sure that that's part of our doctrine. We're doing it right now. We're doing it in the Pacific where we're training. It may not be specifically division-centric, and I can give you examples where we have battalions out with maybe securing core enablers and other things for logistics that are enabling our campaign over there. And then the last piece, and there'll be more, but on warfighting, one of my frustrations is what it takes to train higher echelon. So you get higher at like brigade and division and corps to actually do collective training, which is important that you're doing that. It's very difficult to do that without having a significant cost to the units that are below you. And I think we have to fix that. We've got to figure out with the simulations that we have and also looking at layering some of our events together, how we can reduce that burden on our units so that they can continue to train what their wartime missions are. I was just out at NTC yesterday. We're looking at rotations. We've done a couple, but how do we look at getting divisions there that actually can train as part of that? And we have the terrain that's down there to do that, and we can fall in there and potentially do warfighters as a part of it. So that's warfighting. The second is we're going to have to deliver ready combat power. I've assigned Army Material Command to take a look at this. I'm going to go down just a couple of things that we're looking at. But the first one, and I hope everybody here appreciates it, is we have to reinforce commanders at every level and get them the authorities that they need, because every installation, every state has different challenges, different problems. And I always say if you're going to go to Alaska or down to Irwin or Camp Shelby, Mississippi, all of those are different. They have their different missions, and we need to make sure that they have different resources to handle the problems that they need to be ready for their missions. And so we need to take a look at that, and that's part of, I think, powering down. Some of that goes to streamlining services. There's a lot of services that we have, I would say, accumulated over the past 20 years. Do we need all of those? And we need to give commanders locally say, hey, I don't need this one particularly, but I would like to invest in something else, like H2F as an example. So there are other things that I think that we can do. We are working very hard back in the building with Mr. Bush at ASALT, really everybody back there at what we can do to improve our industrial base. And we've made some significant gains. We can talk about that in the question and answer as far as what we're doing. 155 is a good example, but we have to take this opportunity right now to continue to invest in that and improve it and bring that forward. The other thing I think we need to look at on delivering ready combat power is predictive maintenance. And I always use the example, and I grew up in farm country where, you know, now you have the ability through predictive maintenance to tell you when you need to service a vehicle. And so we are in the process right now of reviewing that. My personal opinion from when I was a commander is we service too much. And I think that also that what that does is it's very taxing on the units to be able to do that. So we're taking a look at that. I also think we have to look at how we do inventories. I'm always reminded when if you go into a Walmart and you ask them, you know, they're great big and they got a huge warehouse, they can basically inventory that overnight. And then we have company commanders that will take 2 weeks to lay things out. So I know we can use what we have available right now through our commercial partners to figure out something to do that. Because again, the most valuable thing that we have, especially for our young leaders, is time. So that's delivering ready combat power, ready combat formations. The third is continuous transformation. And I mentioned up front how the character war is changing, and you know we're seeing this in Ukraine. And for all the leaders out there, you know you can plug in. Back we have various levels of lessons that we're looking at right now, whether they're unclassified, classified, or all the way up. But we're learning a ton. The battlefield is changing and changing quickly. And if you just look on the open source and what's happening with unmanned systems, unmanned aerial systems, counter UAS that is needed to defend against that. In some ways, we're going back, when I hear some of the TTPs, there's some things like camouflage. And using a lot of the things that some of us grew up in the 90s talking about that we're going to have to bring back in TTPs. But there are a lot of things out there that we're going to have to change how we do business. And the biggest part of these lessons learned is when we talk about it back in the building, and I think this applies to all of us here, is that there's a difference between a lesson observed, which, hey, look, this is happening, we need to do something, and a lesson learned. And what I've challenged the team to do is to make sure that we're going back and how is that getting into our schoolhouses? How is our professional military education changing so that we're getting after what those lessons are? What are we doing to change our acquisition processes if we need to change our acquisition process to do that? And then what are we doing at the unit level? So some of those techniques, tactics, and procedures that I'm talking about, how are we passing that down to make sure that our leaders out there, as they're training, understand what's happening? You take one of our rifle platoons out there that may have one Raven, one UAS, and I think that we're going to have to change. There's going to be multiple, and we're going to have everybody inside of a formation, and probably regardless of what type of formation you are, that's going to have to understand how to use those systems to make us more survivable and more lethal on the battlefield. The other thing I want to talk about is moving complexity up. So I've been out several times. I saw this when I was at Grayling. Was also this week, went down to Bliss to the 1st Armored Division and then out to NTC. And we need to reduce complexity. And what I mean by complexity, this is mainly in the network. And I've been working this as the vice for the last year with the under very hard on C2 on what we can do to fix that. And the example is you can't have somebody roll in with 10 vehicles and 50 Pelican cases and set up all kinds of antennas, and that's your C2 node. Besides the visual signal that you're going to have, you're going to spike on EW. It's going to be very easy to target any C2 node that's out there. And so what we have to do and what we're working on is reducing the complexity and passing that up a little bit to the larger formations that aren't going to move. We want lean, mobile, very mobile formations really at the brigade level and below. And I think we can do that. And I'll give you an example of one of the things that we're working on. I brought it with me, don't have it up here today, but the technology exists right now for a commander to be in the back of a vehicle, have a tablet, have his fire support officer, his intel officer, his ops officer next to him, and they are looking at the same common operating picture, same common intel picture with access to joint fires and the things that they need. They can be moving along and basically blending in with a lot of off-the-shelf technology that we have for transport. They could move into a building, they could be up on Wi-Fi inside of a building, and basically plug that into a small projector, and that whole unit would have that picture. And that's what we got to trade out for those 25 or 30 Pelican cases, because the technology exists to do that right now, and we got to move to that. It's going to make us more mobile. It's going to reduce our logistics footprint. It's going to do all kinds of things to help us out. So that's continuous transformation. The last is strengthening the profession, and really for us, that underpins everything that we do. And as all of us in here, and there's many in here that have been in the Army a long time like I have, know what you've gotten from leaders through the years. And I remember back being a company commander, and the infantry, armor, and field artillery magazines, when they came out, those things were like gold to me. And I looked at those and I collected them up, and usually there was always articles in them, like from another company commander and first sergeant team, and they talked about how they had screwed up a training meeting. And of course, I was immediately like, okay, I want to read that. I want to find out what's going on I can learn from. But we were sharing lessons and people were writing things. And I think that that's critically important for our profession, that we're actually having a professional dialogue inside of our profession, inside of our journals, and we're making those available and we're learning from each other. So there's going to be a big push for that. General Brito and I are getting ready we're working on rolling something out on that here in the next month or month and a half. The other thing, last, and there's a lot to strengthen the profession of arms, but I think we got to get after discipline and standards. This discipline and standards are the reason that we are going to be successful in battle. It is the foundation of any good unit, is discipline and standards. And I want every commander, and I've had a lot of conversations about this. The SMA and I were just out at PCC talking to commanders across all compos that, hey, we have your back. We trust commanders out there. We know you're doing the right thing, and I think that that's the environment that we got to have to make sure that we're doing that. And again, you don't just turn the switch on when you deploy, and there's a lot of folks in here who have deployed and know that. You build that inside your unit when you train. You build it when you're back in your armories or your company coffs. That is not something you can just decide to do, and I think we have to get after discipline and standards. I'll close it up here. National Guard is nearly 40% of our operational force. So like I said up front, we're not doing anything as an Army. We're going to do all of this together. I know that there's some headwinds that the Army is facing. Talk to General Hokanson and General Jensen. We're going to get together and figure out how to tackle those problems together. That's exactly what we need to do. It's exactly what we would be doing when we deploy downrange, and that's exactly what we're going to do as we continue to transform. We're all going to have to transform. I'm really proud of the National Guard, and I look. I don't know if Washington is in here. If General Brett Doherty, I haven't seen him since I left First Corps. Washington in here? I was so impressed when I was out at First Corps with what they were doing, and any little thing that I could do to help that they were responding to, and it was COVID and January 6th. I mean, the list goes on that a lot of you are out there doing that are responding to things, and it's impressive. And I think it's like I tell everybody, the Army is busy as ever, and the Guard is as busy as ever that I've seen it. And we were just talking about that. It's hard to believe, you'd have said a couple of years ago that you could be busier, but I think we're busier than we have been. So my hat's off to all of you. You do all that while you are important and valuable members of your community. We appreciate that, and I think that that's a strength I certainly value, and I know leaders who've been around and operated with you certainly value. General Milley and General McConville have had a great relationship with the Guard. I look forward to having an incredible relationship with the Guard. Again, big part of our Army, and thankful to be here, and I'm ready to take your questions. No questions? You let me off the hook?
Sir?
Okay.
Captain Rogo, Georgia Army National Guard. Sir, could you please elaborate on the role that National Guard will play alongside with the active duty component going forward in competing with and defeating our nation's enemies?
Absolutely. I mean, like I said up front, I don't think there's anything that we're doing. You look what's happened in, where we're operating over in EUCOM, and we're going to be deploying together. I can give you countless examples of what we're doing, and a lot of this is just campaigning back in the Middle East, what we're doing right now to operate, what we have going on for state partnership programs and exercises that are happening all around the globe. So everywhere that I'm going, I'm going to Europe here soon about all the things that are going on. So I think that's going to continue to happen. A big thing of what I'm talking about that we have to look at going forward is how we transform. If the National Guard's 40% of our operational force, you don't go anywhere with only 60% of your team. We're going to need everybody and figure out exactly how we need to be organized to make sure that we go forward. I'm used to that because that's been what I've seen over the last 20 years. And I think it's going to continue to do that. The real challenge that I have commented on a bunch for the Guard, there's also an increase in what you're being asked to do in your Title 32 status. And so I think we have to, that's difficult as well with us. Like I said, the Guard is busy, busy, busy. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning, sir. Captain Duplessis from the Idaho National Guard. Are you in favor of returning to the APFT as the test of record? And what concerns do you have of the implications of another multi-year transition between tests when it comes to the readiness of a fit force?
Yeah. So I like the ACFT. And I tell everybody nobody wants to be told you're going to get a new uniform and a new PT test at 32 years in service. So I wasn't excited about that. But I like the ACFT, and when I was the Corps Commander, it was something that we did, and we were still using slightly different standards. Every Wednesday we got together and we did that. It was great to come together. It's changing our PT culture, and I think we've learned a lot about what we need to do over the last 20, 30, 40 years. The science is a lot better, and so I'm a fan of the ACFT. So we're working through that on the ACFT. As we move forward. The APFT was great. If I lived through, there's probably several in here, lived through this as well, where the APFT changed and adjusted, and I think that that's what we're going to have to do with the ACFT. I'm going to also turn this over to the Sergeant Major of the Army. He may have a thought on this as well. I can hear you, but I don't know if, no.
How about now? Nothing? Okay, I don't want to waste any time, so we're absolutely staying with the ACFT. Absolutely. The vice hit on it. I mean, we are changing the culture of fitness in the total Army, right? And it's a journey. There was a staff sergeant at Rochester, Minnesota, from your formation that asked the same question, except she actually quoted the NDA. She almost went like paragraph and line. Incredibly impressive. And she said it would do harm if we went backwards, and I've seen the change. I was incredibly proud of that staff sergeant because she's spot on, and so we're staying the course.
Thanks.
Good morning, General. My name is Andrew Zaplicki. I'm an AGR officer assigned at the Virginia National Guard. As you stated, the National Guard has been mobilized and deployed at an unprecedented pace for the last 20 years, with little increases to our full-time force compared to the level of the workload. The only two units resourced at 100% in the Virginia Guard is our recruiting battalion and our civil support team. The lack of full-time soldiers in our formations hurts readiness and degrades interoperability between the different components. There's just so much work and not enough hands. Given the challenges of resourcing across the components, what is your view on resourcing the total Army team to be more interoperable in today's environment?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We were just having a discussion about that this morning and had a bunch of discussions about that. So part of this is that I think we're going to have to take a close look at this, exactly what we're doing. And this gets to where we've been with force structure going down and then coming back up. A lot of the things that we're talking about also with full-time support is where do we have the full-time support, and given a lot of the missions that are Title 32. So I don't have an exact answer for you right now. I've heard this a bunch. I think this is something that we need to get together and figure out together as a family. That was one of the discussions that we had. We have to figure out what the right answer is. And it may look different. That's the other thing that I said in my comments. It may be slightly different in Virginia than it is in somewhere else. And I go to places that have maybe a MOB site or other things. So I think that we have to put all that into the equation and figure it out. So I know this has been a conversation because I've heard this a little bit as the vice and increasingly now, is that we have to get together, I think, and figure this out. Certainly the intent is not to make things more painful on folks. That's not what we're about. To the larger part of this all gets down to budget. And we spend a lot of time talking about this back in the building and figuring that out. And the other pieces that we all have to figure out then are what are the trades. It's like my own personal budget. I have a personal budget. I'm going to be able to afford one thing or the other. But we have to look at full-time support, and I think we have to do that together and then have a conversation about it with a lot of the other stakeholders that are involved with it. I'm going to ask if General Jensen, do you want to make any comments on that?
Thanks, Vice, for that. Hey, great question. Absolutely. From my perspective, and if you haven't had a chance, I recommend you pick up the current NGAUS magazine, because I believe I have an article in that touches this exact point, is that, when you look back at our full-time manning model, it predates 9/11. What we were asked to do pre-9/11, significantly different than what we're being asked to do the last 20 years or even the last couple years. And I'm not sure, well, I'll say it a little bit stronger. I am convinced that the pre-9/11 model doesn't fit the post-9/11 Army. As the Vice laid out, the Army is going to need all three compos going forward. There is no scenario going forward where one of the compos gets left behind, because we need the whole Army to do what our nation is asking us to do. And as a result, I think we have to take a very hard look at that full-time manning model to make sure that, one, we're not putting too much stress on our full-time force, which I would argue we have, and two, we're not leaving capability or capacity behind unintentionally, right? As the Vice laid out, this is all about a risk equation. Hey, what can I afford versus what do I really need to do? What is that risk? But I think what I hear General George talking about is we need to revisit this and rediscuss the risk across the Army. And so, Vice, I can tell you, we look forward to that conversation and we'll fully support that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Good morning, General. Colonel Fonseca here, Illinois Army National Guard. Sir, you partially answered my question earlier, but I want to fine-tune a little bit. I just returned from Poland from a 2-year command as the garrison commander for the newly established garrison up there in our partner nation, Poland. And given the finite resources, the garrison is comprised primarily of Compo 2 and 3 soldiers, but the divisional rotation forces are active duty. And I guess my question is, do you foresee a future where the guard units are plugged into the rotational pool, the divisional units? Over.
So we're, part of this gets to be is to 12304 Bravo. I think when we're looking longer term, when things stay the same, it's a little bit easier. So yes, I would see, longer term rotations. It's easier if you're going to do something in the time of need immediately, typically to take somebody from the active component. So, and we'll see where we go with EUCOM right now. Again, as I think you've heard us all say up here, it's going to be whatever solution that we're going to provide, it's going to be a total Army solution because it needs to be. And because there's a lot of capability in the Guard that they can bring that will be unique and will be required that's over there.
Thank you,
So
sir.
I'm looking forward to getting over there and seeing the last. It's been a couple years since I've been over to Poland.
Cool.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. Captain Justin Rudin, Charlie Battery, 1st of the 111th Field Artillery, Virginia Army National Guard. My question to you is, what do you see as the future of towed artillery, especially given everything that we've learned with Ukraine?
Yeah, so one of the things on, for Ukraine, the big thing, you basically just implied that, is that you're going to have to be able to move very quickly, and you're going to be located. So they have used the 777s very well. I think we found that out. One of the big lessons that I've looked at is that U.S. equipment works really well and is very lethal, and I think everybody's figuring that out. But that's one of the things we're looking at right now. General Rainey, who's who's leading Army Futures Command, is actually doing a fires study. So we've done a lot, and we've done long-range fires. We're actually studying fires in the formation to see what we need really to make sure we're good at echelon with equipment. I've deployed with 777s, didn't want to go anywhere outside of their range, wanted to have them always available. And I think what you're implying is, are we looking at something like a mobile, a system that we can use, a wheeled system, and I think we're looking at all of that.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, good morning. Lieutenant Taylor Payne from Washington State. The question I have for you is, we talk about modernization of forces and moving from coin to LISCO. What is the biggest roadblocks that you view, especially as Compo 2 and all compos, to train our forces to prepare them for that modernization efforts, whether it be logistic-based, institutional, NTC rotations and stuff like that?
Well, I think we're doing that. We've been down that road on, adjusting to those kinds of things. And what I tell everybody is that you're going to have to be, I think units at every level are going to have to be ready for the spectrum of conflict. So when I deployed over my platoons and companies that were deploying over in Afghanistan, for example, when they were up in Kunar, they were doing, what I would say at that level on the light infantry side, very high end. They were in firefights, calling in indirect, using close air support, combat aviation, and doing all of those things. I think the biggest adjustment that we need to make is broader than that. There are some that I mentioned that we have to change as far as the environment, EW. We weren't worried about, we own the skies. We weren't worried about being targeted. We're not going to go anywhere anymore where somebody's not going to see everything that we have that's on the battlefield. And I think that's a different way of thinking, I think, at that level. So there's little adjustments I think we need to make there. And I think that they get a little more broader as you move up. And we're going to have to do that at our training centers. We're going to have to talk about that at home station. It's probably have not been, you take the Expeditionary Signal Battalion that I was talking about, they weren't thinking about those kinds of things. They're now going to be potentially facing UAS and targeting as well. So that's what I was talking about when I'm talking about strengthening the profession, is that we're all sharing those kinds of things as well before. So it's not just happening in the dirt when we're training at CTCs. We can start learning that through PME, through leader professional development, and all the things that we're doing.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, good morning. Lieutenant Colonel Chris Ish, the Oklahoma Army National Guard, currently serving with Army Futures Command. Sir, you talked about re-looking at the Army acquisition process and the good work that's going on with ASALT. Can you speak a little bit more to that, especially as we're looking at potential of a long-term CR and some of the other issues like confirmations, and how that's going to play into the near term for our modernization? Yeah,
first, we obviously don't want a continuing resolution, and all that would do to stop what were new starts and R&D and all of those kinds of things. So, separately to the acquisition piece, and I've mentioned this probably not more broadly, but my thought is we need colorless money, and what I mean by that is that I think if you're down there in a CFT that things are going to change real rapidly, and maybe we had something that was a certain color of money that we were supposed to spend, and we need to be able to rapidly transition it to, as technology is changing, to spend it on something else. I think we could do that, for example, in the counter UAS, we could do that in specific programs. I also think, and we're working a bunch of this right now with munitions, is that there's a certain aspect of multi-year that I think would help us as well. So that we would have, let's say we have money for the network or money for UAS or counter UAS that we could use over a period of time and not have to worry about, you know, using it at all at a specific period within a fiscal year.
Thanks, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning, sir. Captain Meeker with the Washington National Guard. My question relates to generating ready forces and maintenance. Many of us grew up and had experiences throughout 20 years of GWAT of falling in on equipment or swelling OCO funding in order to produce maintenance at the last minute. What are the assumptions that you think need to change, both at the total force and within Compo 2, about generating combat power as it relates to how we maintain our formations?
So some of it is you have a little bit, if we reduce the complexity of our units and you have less stuff to maintain, that obviously helps. Because I think people are struggling, you know, with that. It'd be like me having 3 different cars and trying to figure that out. So I think that's one that will help a little bit, and we've grown a lot, I think, with the number of vehicles. The other thing, like I mentioned, is getting rid of some of the, or is actually being able to tell you when you need to do the maintenance on the vehicle and being a little bit more predictive. I think we can do better at using the technology that's out there. I can list companies. You know, I'm from farm country, so John Deere, you know, you can, Massey, you name whatever company that's out there that I think that we have the ability to help with that. And then the other aspect, it gets to just training our leaders. This gets to strengthening the profession. You get good at things by having leaders that are there teaching you and training you and making sure that we have the right tempo. One of the things that I talked about a lot as a brigade, division, and corps commander that is important, I think, to every one of us out here is predictability, and that really starts with training management and figuring that kind of stuff out and figuring out where everything lays. So we all have a piece and a part to that. We know that things are going to come up they're going to ask our Army to do that are unexpected, but we shouldn't be shooting ourselves in the foot with things that aren't because we're not professionally prepared.
Thank you, sir.
Morning, sir. Captain Moore from the Virginia Air National Guard. You talk a lot about modernization and interoperability. So my question to you is, what are your thoughts and perspective on how we get after modernization, interoperability, and training across the joint force?
Yeah, so all the stuff that I'm talking about with the network, if you heard me talk about the network, we got to make the network, this is JADC2 at the larger level, and we're talking about that. We are getting ready, when we go out, for example, to Project Convergence, and that'll be total Army that's going to be out there. That will also be the Air Force, that will also be the Marines. You heard me mention there's no such thing as a maritime theater or an air theater. They're joint theaters, and there's land and all of that, so we're going to have to operate together. So the more we can do that, we do that a little bit at our CTCs. I think we're doing better at our exercises at getting after that. I think the network and command and control is one of the most important aspects of getting that right. I'm getting the rhythm here. I turn a little to the right.
Good morning, sir. Major Mark Timmons from Oregon Army National Guard. I have a question in regards to recruiting and the efforts the Army is looking at. So in the first 5 months, from some information I saw, the recruiting ribbon generated about 100 opportunities for people to receive that. But the soldier referral bonus program back in 2005 and 6 in the first 5 months generated 5,000 enlistments. So is the Army looking at something new to help get us out of this recruiting slump beyond a ribbon?
I would say yes, we are. And if you can stick around afterwards, if you got any ideas you think we're missing, I'd be happy to hear them. So yes, I do think we're doing a lot of things, and it's like I am dealing with recruiting, Sergeant Major of the Army, the Secretary of the Army. This is something we talk about. There's probably not a day that goes by that I'm not sending an email, talking on the phone about something with this. And we've gone through some adjustments in the last couple of years. The demographics are not, there's less 17 to 25 year olds. More people are struggling passing the ASVAB. More people are struggling with the height weight standard. So we're trying to figure out how we need to maintain our standards, and we're going to. How do we get people into that? So that's Future Soldier Prep Course. I don't know if you've heard of that. That's working really well. We are, I think, looking at how we adjust our marketing and how we get after things. How are we picking our recruiters? Are we selecting the right recruiters? Are we giving them the right tools? The Secretary and I had asked a separate team, so I could give you a pretty long list of what we're doing, and I described them as, not all on the margins, but trying to make, process improvement. And we're in the process right now of actually looking at some bold changes that we're getting ready to talk about doing and adjusting. But it's going to be a tough market out there. Unemployment is low. So, I think we're all in this together. We want the all-volunteer Army is, I think, what's made us great over the last 50 years. And anybody has any ideas on that, we're all ears.
Thank you, sir.
Can I mention one more thing on the recruiting? Because I always tell everybody, so I think it's important that we all tell our story about why we're in the military. I always tell my story, and I was influenced. I couldn't afford to go to college, so I had there was a Korean War veteran who said, "Hey, you should join the Army." I wanted to, I wanted money for college, and whatever reason there is out there that people come in, I find that most people stay because of what you have right here. It's the camaraderie, the people that you're around, and the mission. And so I think all of us. I don't care what compo anybody wants to be in. I don't think we should be competing either, and there needs to be better permeability between all of our compos moving forward. But whatever you can do to tell that story and get your story and get people out, I think will be helpful to us. I think this is the last question.
Thank you for your talk, sir. My name is Captain Furman, Kansas Army National Guard. My question, if you'll forgive me, is do you believe that congressional impasse on promotions harms our military readiness? And if so, can we as private individuals or as an organization here at NGAUS do to help?
Okay. It's been great being with you all this morning. I'll just tell you this: what you always want to do is field. You want to field a full team when you get whatever it is, and so that's the challenge that we're working through. What I'm also, what I'm most concerned about is that people looking at this, down will go, hey, I don't want to, that it has impact on people that may want to stick around. And I'm also concerned, obviously, about families that can't move and can't do those kinds of things. What I'm confident about, though, also is the Army is really good at figuring out how to get shit done and bring everybody together. So I think we'll do that. It'd be nice to get this moved behind us so that we could have a field the full team that's on there. In the meantime, we're going to get after it. Thank you.